Mr. Marks, in the past, we received a letter. We got a copy of a letter from then Deputy Secretary Marion Schneider, and I believe she's left the department now and taken a position with another group, another company outside of Pennsylvania state government. But that she had sent a letter out regarding the ERIC mailing that was sent out after we became part of ERIC, that system that many states are now involved in to check voter registrations, and that ERIC, through a comparison of PennDOT records and Sure System records, the voter system, that they then identified individuals that would be mailed to say that they were eligible to vote, but were not registered to vote. Now, through those comparisons, were the administrators of ERIC able to determine the individuals based on the PennDOT records and comparing that to Sure, who was not a citizen and who was registered to vote in the Sure system? Or has the department done a comparison between the Sure system and the PennDOT records, since the PennDOT record should have an indicator, as you said, in those records to indicate when somebody is not a citizen but has a driver's license or a Pennsylvania ID card? Have they compared the Sure system records, voter records, to the PennDOT system to identify individuals who are not citizens but are registered in our Sure system? Has the department done that?
There are two questions there. I'll answer them in order. The first question, you mentioned communication from Deputy Secretary Schneider regarding a mailing to voters. In that process, the DMV records that were provided to the ERIC program to complete that mailer, to come up with that list, did not include any DMV records that included a non-citizen status. In other words, those records were not sent. They were kept out, obviously, because there was some question as to eligibility of the individuals. In terms of doing a match or doing a comparison between the two databases, we're reviewing that right now with our legal counsel to determine what options are available to us to do a fair match, to do an accurate match, or an accurate comparison between the two databases. Going back to my testimony, I want to point out that there are a lot of considerations that have to be taken into account in order to do what we don't want to do is a ham-handed job that's going to result in thousands of people being removed from the rolls who are perfectly eligible to vote.
So you do not believe the PennDOT system is accurate when it has an INS number or an indicator attached to a file that says that individual has a license but is not a citizen? You don't believe that that database is accurate enough to utilize to identify the non-citizens in our state that have driver's licenses or Pennsylvania issued ID cards?
I don't think it's accurate enough alone to do that. And the reason why is it's point-in-time data. The correction that we're putting in place in the next couple of months, at the time the individual walks into PennDOT, it's not just checking the saved database. It's also the individual providing documentation themselves personally, indicating that they're not a citizen. So we know at that point in time the individual is not a citizen. We don't know that 3 or 4 years later, even though they may still have that status on their DMV record, that they're still not a citizen. Annually.
So you can't from the date of voter registration determine that when the license was issued to somebody with an INS number that was not a citizen and they registered to vote, that they illegally registered on that date. You can't determine that because I believe the Sure system has the date of voter registration when you registered, and the PennDOT should have the date that the license was issued. So if somebody's issued a license with an INS indicator showing that they're not a citizen, and you compare that to the Sure system, you should be able to identify everybody who's illegally registered.
Yeah, it's theoretically possible to do that kind of comparison and come up with a number.
Have you done that? Have they run those two databases against each other? Because I had information that they in fact have done that in the past. I posed that letter to Secretary Cortez in a letter, received back from Acting Secretary Torres no response to that question, and I think the citizens of the state deserve an answer as to whether or not our department is actively comparing those databases, trying to ensure that we take foreign nationals out of our voter registration database.
We are in the process of doing that right now. As I said in my testimony, we are reviewing that with our legal counsel to determine what options are available to us. There are a lot of legal considerations as well as practical and technical considerations that have to be taken into account. When Wisconsin, I think, you know, on this point, the experience of other jurisdictions is informative and very relevant. Florida, for example, when they did a similar comparison, they started with a very large number of records from the DMV, 180,000 that had some kind of non-citizen status on them. After they did a comparison using additional resources, it's not just the DMV database and the voter registration database. We may need other resources like the SAVE database to do a fair comparison. But they whittled that 180,000 down to a little under 3,000 records. And then after doing additional verification, manual verification with the counties, which is also part of doing a thorough analysis, they ended up with, I think, 106 records that they ultimately recommended for removal from the voter rolls. So I think it would be irresponsible at this point, before we've worked through all of the legal considerations, the technical considerations, to throw out a number. We know we're going to start with a high number in the DMV database. But we also know, based on the experience of other states, that it's reasonable to expect that that number is going to be reduced significantly as we move forward with our analysis.